Hi class, in this we're going to go over a chapter on economic growth. So this is going to be a short video, so it should be pretty straightforward. All right, so economic growth. Now, one thing we had to get out there that you guys need to understand from the very beginning is that economic growth doesn't mean how much money you have. And really for this chapter and then for many chapters in this textbook, how rich you are is not defined by how much money you have. How rich you are is defined by how much stuff you have. Same thing with economic growth. So if you look at different countries, if compare a poor country to a rich country, now what made the rich country rich doesn't mean they have more money. It means they have more stuff, right? So they can consume more stuff. So same thing with this economic growth. So imagine a scenario. Let's suppose if your income doubled, right? So let's say last year you made $10,000 and this year you made $20,000. Pretty good, right? But what if the price of everything else that you buy in the store increased by threefold, and then your income only doubled? So you are not better off. You're actually worse off now, right? So again, don't think about how much money you have as an indication of how rich you are, or how much your growth is. Think about how much stuff you can buy, how much stuff you can consume, how much stuff you have. That's really define what this economic growth is. All right, so let's cover some definitions. So first, standard living. You guys probably just hear this all the time. So standard living is the level of overall well-being enjoyed by an average individual, group, or society. So if you look at different countries, U.S. we have very high standard living compared to other countries, such as Cambodia, Mexico, so those developing countries. So and even within U.S., right, different states have different standard living. So if you look at average individual who live in, let's say, California, might have a higher standard living compared to somebody living in, on average, living in Alabama, right? So standard living just defined, again, not how much money you have. This is the overall well-being enjoyed by individual. Now, so this textbook, this chapter, measures only how much stuff we have. But sometimes the standard living is not necessarily measured by how much stuff you have. There are some measurement that cannot be, or some indicators that cannot be measured just by how much stuff you have. Think about your leisure, right? So let's suppose we have an individual who's working 150 hours a week, making a lot of money, can buy a lot of stuff, but they don't have any time to enjoy it, right? Compared to somebody who's working over 40 hours a week, have a little bit less money, but this person have more time to enjoy the stuff he has, right? So sometimes the leisure is also calculated into this standard living. But again, that can be very difficult to measure, okay? But for now, just thinking that this standard living really goes down to how much stuff you have, right? So you have more stuff, then you have a higher standard living. That you cannot buy anything, then you have a lower standard living. Okay, so for economic growth, this is an increase in the real gross domestic product, or real gross domestic product per capita. So we learned this before. So the real domestic part of the real GDP, and the real GDP per capita. So real GDP per capita is just the real GDP per person, right? So either that you have this overall increase in real GDP for the entire country, or you might have a increase of real GDP per person. Either way, this will show an increase of your economic growth. Now, you might be asking, why is there a difference? Why isn't that whenever you have an increase in real GDP, so if your real GDP is increasing, then why wouldn't your real GDP per capita also increases? Well, because this key here says per capita, that means per person, right? So imagine if your economy is increasing by, here, let me use a different note here. So imagine if your economy, your real GDP is increasing by 10%. That's a very good measurement. That's a very good increase. But what if your population is increasing by 20%, right? And then now you have a bigger population to share your smaller increase of 10%, then each person is actually worse off, right? So the real GDP per capita really increase equals to your real GDP divided by the population, right? So if you only have a real GDP if you only have a real GDP increasing by a little bit, but you have a huge increase in population, then you are not that much better off. And if you look at many developing countries in the world today, that's their problem. That's one of the problems they have. That the economy is growing for many of the developing countries. So look at India. The economy is growing tremendously for the last 30 years, but the per person level is not. Well, it's still increasing, but not by that much. And the reason why, because the population is growing very, very fast. But if you look at other countries, maybe like, for example, China. Now, China has a very controversial policy of this one-child policy. You guys, I don't know if you heard it before. So from about late 1970s to about maybe early 2000s, so for like a 30-year time period, China limit how many children each married couple can have, which is just one kid. Now, the idea for that is that they try to control this population, right? So you have a very high increase in real GDP, very low increase in population. Then overall, the real GDP per capita is increasing very, very fast. And that is what's happening in China for the last 30, 40 years. The real GDP per capita has been increasing so fast, and partially is because the population hasn't been increasing that much. But if you look at India, because population has no control on it, so the population is also increasing, and then and it goes back down to better healthcare, better nutrition, so people are living longer, right? So population is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So even though you have a very high real GDP increasing for the entire country, but for individual person wise, the increase is not that much. Okay, all right. So now, if you look at the real GDP per capita for the world, has been pretty steady until something happened here, right? If you guys are interested, there's a class called historical economics, so you can really study what happened in the history. In economics for the entire history. So partially, this change here, this is the industrial revolution, right? So after industrial revolution, the GDP for the entire world can produce so much more good than before. So therefore, each per person level is increasing very, very fast for the last 300 years or so. Okay, all right. We can use our old friend, our production possibility frontier, to measure our real GDP or the economic growth. So just a little review from previous chapters. This is a long time ago. Remember PPF, that you have this too good, right? So let's say you have apples and banana. Let's suppose this is the only too good the economy produce. So PPF is just a straight line, and this is the PPF, and that measures how much is the maximum combination of too good the economy can produce, right? So if you're on the PPF, you are efficient. If you are inside PPF, you are inefficient. So such as waste in the economy or unemployment in the economy. And then if you are somewhere outside the PPF, that's impossible, right? So we can use the PPF to show economic growth, because if anytime the economy can produce more good, that is economic growth. So let's suppose we have a better technology in producing apples and banana. Then what happens? We can produce more apples, can produce more bananas, and then your PPF will be shifted outward, right? So this is called economic growth. So anytime you have a PPF shifting outward, that's indication the economy can produce more good, and that is economic growth. So we can have more good to consume at the end. Okay, so this economic growth can happen in different ways. So first, we can have more additional resource. So this can be land, labor, capital, entrepreneur abilities. Again, this is just your factor productions. Remember, so four factor productions: land are all the natural resource in the land. So imagine if the country discovered more oil, that's more land. Well, not land exactly, but more natural resource. That's part of land, right? Or you have more labor, so you have more employees to work for you, or you might have more skilled employees, right? So with better knowledge. Capital, that's the physical equipment. So more tools, more computers, more trucks. And entrepreneur ability is just the willingness of individuals to gather all the resource, take on all the risk and run the business. And I mean, there are policies out there that can encourage entrepreneurship. So for example, imagine government says for any new business, you're going to be tax-free for 10 years. Well, that's very good, right? That will increase the entrepreneurability. And that's what President Bush did in the early 2000s. So we lowered taxes for many of the small business, and then they really encouraged some of the small business activities in America. Okay, or we might have invention of new technologies. So if you look at the U.S. economy and even the world economy in the 1990s, there was a huge increase of productivity. Why? Because computers, right? So that's an invention of new technologies that will make the production more efficient and cheaper. And then lastly, that if you have existing resources become more productive, and this is especially when you have labor, right? So imagine if the country invests more money in education, and then making our labors more productive, and then that will be the third example here. Speaking of that, currently in America, so today is 2021. So currently in America, that's the problem for us. That there are many jobs that require very fixed set of skills, but many of the people who are applying for them don't have the skills. So especially if you look at like AC repairs, there's a huge shortage for that. Especially in Texas, there's always a need for AC repair person. Plumbers, people don't a lot of people look down to plumbers, but trust me, plumbers can make a lot of money. Nurses, right? So we always need more nurses. So we have all these positions that pays very, very good, but currently we don't have people applying for them, or because they don't qualify. So one thing we can do as the entire country is to maybe providing better trainings for people to fill those positions. Okay, so that'll be the third category. All right. Now capitals. So again, capitals are the tools and machines and infrastructures and knowledge used to produce goods and services. For economic growth, this term capital is especially important because I want you guys to think about a choice between capital good and then consumer good. So let me give you an example, right? Suppose our country have a choice. We can invest more money into computer production, or can we invest more money into I don't know, like what Justin Bieber's more musics, right? So which one will be good for our economy in the long run? Now in the long run, we want more capitals, because the more computers, the more machines, the more tool you have, you can produce more good in the future, right? So this capital investment is also investment into the future. Now, if you invest into more money into production of music, production of movies, those are good. They're not bad, but they tend to expire very quickly, right? You can only use it for a certain time, so that wouldn't be good for your future growth. So imagine you have an economy that looks like this, right? So for this economy here, we have very low investment in capital, right? So most of the investment goes to our consumer good. So again, music, movies, and then for capital good, it's very little investment, right? So, but compared to another economy, that if you have very high investment in capital and very low investment, or not very low, but somewhere lower investment in consumer good. Now, any idea which economy will grow faster in the future? Will be this one, right? It's a high capital investment, and then that was the story of Japan in the 1960s to 1980s. That the country invests into a lot of capitals, so the economy was growing very, very fast in those years, and because they have a high capital investment. Okay. All right. So again, if you have low capital investment, your GDP will increase, and then your PPF will shift upward, but only by a small amount. But if you have a high capital investment, you can shift your PPF by a bigger amount in the future, because we have more investment in the economy. All right, let's continue. Now, next, how do we measure our economic growth using GDPs? So we're going to go back to one of the formula we used before. So to measure growth rate. So growth rate is the changes of a variable over a specific time period, usually expressed in the percentage change form. So if you guys remember the chapters on elasticity, right? So we have percentage change equals to the new number minus the old number divided by the old number times 100%, and that is your percentage change. For our growth rate, for the GDP growth rate, we do the same. Use the same formula, right? So for GDP growth rate, so GDP2, that's your new GDP, minus your GDP1, which is the old GDP, divided by the GDP1 and times 100%. There should be percentage here. That will give you your growth rate for GDP. Same thing for real GDP, right? Just put an R here, that will be the real GDP. So the new GDP minus the old GDP divided by the old GDP times 100%, and that is your growth rate, right? So suppose we have an example here, the GDP in year 2 is 105, year 1 is 100, then what is our growth rate for GDP, real GDP? So let's go back. So this will be 105 minus 100, so new number minus old number, divided by old number times 100%, and that will just give you 5%, right? And that is our real GDP growth rate, right? So just like that, so new number minus old number divided by old number, okay? All right, so last concept for this chapter, something called a rule of 72. So to measure this economic growth, it's very similar to what you guys learned before in your finite math class or your algebra class, is the this formula for interest, right? So your future value equals to 1 plus your interest rate to the power of your years. Remember this? And this will give you also times the present value. Almost forgot about that. Right, so let's suppose the question says, if you put in $1,000 into the bank, so that's your present value, and then the bank pays you a 10% interest per year, and then after 5 years, how much money would you have, right? So you're just going to use your $1,000 times 1 plus 10% and to the power of 5. Now that will give you your future value. All right, so for this rule of 72 is a very simple calculation. It just gives you a rough estimate of how long it would take for your investment or for your present value to double in the future, right? So again, we're not looking for how much exactly it is or how long exactly. We're just looking for how long it would take to roughly double. Again, the keyword here is to roughly double. Okay. The formula is very simple. It's just your number is 72 divided by the growth rate, and that will give you show you how long it would take to double your investment. So for example, for our question here, that if your interest rate, if your growth rate is 10%, that according to rule of 72, so 72 divided by 10%, so that's roughly about 7.2 years that your investment will double. Okay. You know what? Let's check on this. Let's see if the number is somewhere close. Here, let me open my Excel spreadsheet. All right, let's use this area here. All right, so our growth rate is 10%. So if we do 1 plus our 10% growth rate, I've got an equal sign here. So equal sign 1 plus our growth rate, and then to the power of 7.2. Okay, that's almost 2, right? So it's pretty close, right? So that's your rule of 72. So give you a rough estimate of how long it would take for your investment to double. Okay, and then let's suppose you have a growth rate of 5%. That's much smaller, right? So if you have 5%, that's 72 divided by 5%, or just 5 divided by 5, then this should be like what, like a 14.4 maybe. Right, so that will be the answer, right? So you can verify this using your own spreadsheet to see what the answer is, but should be something very close to it. All right, so guys, that's it for this chapter. Let me make sure there's nothing else. All right, that's it. So have any question, let me know. Okay, good luck. See you later. Bye bye.